I sat in that mahogany-paneled office at Greater Metro Bank, my hands trembling as I smoothed out my navy blue blazer for the 10th time. I'm Jennifer Morris, a 32-year-old senior architect living in the heart of Chicago. I've spent the last decade working 80-hour weeks, surviving on lukewarm coffee and the singular, burning dream of finally owning a home. Not just any home, a quiet two-bedroom brownstone in Lincoln Park where the floorboards don't creak under the weight of a neighbor's footsteps. I had the 20% down payment saved in a high-yield account, a pristine career trajectory, and what I thought was a perfect credit score. I was ready. The loan officer, a man named Mr. Henderson with silver-rimmed glasses and a thin, sympathetic mouth, didn't look at me. He looked at his computer screen, then at the thick file on his desk, then back at the screen. The silence in the room was heavy, smelling of old paper and expensive air freshener. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I smiled, a tight, nervous thing. "Is there a problem with the employment verification, Mr. Henderson? I can call my firm's HR right now." Mr. Henderson sighed, a long, weary sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. He finally met my eyes, and there was no professional warmth there, only a deep, confusing pity. "Ms. Morris, I'm afraid the mortgage application has been flatly denied. Not just flagged for review. Denied." I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I got dizzy. "That's impossible. I have a 810 credit score. I've never missed a payment in my life." "According to this credit report," Henderson said, sliding a thick packet across the desk toward me, "your score is currently a 422. You have 14 outstanding delinquent accounts, 3 of which are currently in active collections. There is a secondary mortgage on a property in Indiana, which you don't even own, that has been in default for 6 months. And there's an unpaid personal loan for $85,000 in your name from a private lender." The room tilted. I stared at the numbers. $85,000. Indiana. Default. My name was at the top of every page, but the signatures at the bottom, they looked like mine, but they were slightly too loopy, too rushed. I felt a cold, oily sensation wash over me. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on every birthday card since I was 5. "This is identity theft," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I didn't sign these. I've never lived in Indiana." Henderson leaned back, his chair creaking. "If it's fraud, Jennifer, you need to file a police report immediately. But I have to be honest with you. The accounts were opened using your social security number, your maiden name, and, most damagingly, they were all verified using a secondary email address that shares your last name. morrisfamilytrust@gmail.com. Does that ring a bell?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I stood up so abruptly my chair nearly flipped over. I didn't say goodbye. I grabbed the papers, my fingers smudging the ink of the $240,000 total debt, and stumbled out into the bright, mocking Chicago sunshine. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. It was a text from my mother, Elaine. "Hey, Jen. Hope the bank went well. Don't forget, we're all meeting at the bistro at 6 o'clock to celebrate your brother's new business venture. See you there, sweetie." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My brother Kyle. The golden boy. The 30-year-old entrepreneur who had bad luck with every startup he touched. My mother, the woman who always told me that because I was the strong one, I had to carry the weight for everyone else. I felt a scream building in my throat, raw and jagged. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the bistro, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned. The restaurant was one of those overpriced C&B scene spots where the lighting is too dim and the wine is $40 a glass. I saw them immediately in a corner booth. My mother, wearing a new silk scarf that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, and Kyle, looking smug in a designer tracksuit, nursing a glass of bourbon. They looked happy. They looked like people who didn't have $240,000 of stolen debt hanging over their heads. I walked up to the table, my footsteps echoing on the tile. I didn't sit down. I threw the credit report onto the center of the table, right on top of the appetizers. It landed with a heavy thud, splashing a bit of calamari sauce onto Kyle's sleeve. Jennifer! My God, what is wrong with you? My mother hissed, looking around frantically to see if the socialites at the next table had noticed. Pick that up. You're making a scene. Read it, Mom, I said. My voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. Read the part where I owe $250,000 for a house in Indiana I've never seen. Read the part where my credit is so destroyed I'll never be able to rent a studio apartment, let alone buy a home. Kyle glanced at the papers, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He tried to laugh it off, that high-pitched, whiny titter he used whenever he was caught in a lie. Sis, come on. It's just paperwork. Don't be so dramatic. Dramatic? I leaned over the table, my face inches from his. I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath, bourbon bought with my credit. You stole my life, Kyle. You and Mom. You used my SSN to fund your gambling, didn't you? That business venture is just more debt, isn't it? My mother grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes weren't filled with guilt, they were filled with a terrifying, righteous anger. Jennifer, lower your voice. We did what we had to do. Kyle was in deep with some very unpleasant people. Family is one big wallet, Jen. We've always said that. You have the big fancy job, you have the stability. We just borrowed some of your potential to save your brother's life. You should be thanked that you could help us. Borrowed my potential? I ripped my arm away. You didn't borrow anything. You stole it. You committed a felony. I'm going to the police, Mom. I'm going tonight. The color left her face then, replaced by a mask of cold, manipulative desperation. You wouldn't. If you call the police, Kyle goes to prison. I go to prison as an accomplice. You would ruin the Morris name over a few numbers on a screen? Think about how this looks, Jennifer. The successful daughter putting her own mother in a jumpsuit? You'd be a pariah. Everyone in our circle would know you're the girl who chose a house over her own flesh and blood. I'm not a girl, Mom. I'm a woman whose mother just bankrupted her, I said, my voice finally breaking into a sob of pure, unadulterated rage. And as for the Morris name, you already dragged it through the dirt. I'm just the one calling the cleaning crew. I turned and walked out, ignoring my mother's shrieks of ungrateful and selfish that followed me to the door. I got into my car and sat in the dark, the reality of the betrayal sinking into my bones. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This was the culmination of 32 years of being the backup plan for a family of parasites. To understand how I got here, you have to understand the dynamic of the Morris household. Growing up in the suburbs of Indianapolis, I wasn't a child, I was an insurance policy. My father passed away when I was 7, leaving behind a modest life insurance policy and a house that was paid off. My mother, Elaine, didn't see that money as a safety net for her children's education. She saw it as a ticket to the lifestyle she thought she deserved. By the time I was 12, the life insurance money was gone, spent on consultants for her various failed boutique businesses and a wardrobe that screamed old money, while our fridge was often stocked with nothing but generic cereal and wilting lettuce. Kyle, 2 years my junior, was her little prince. He was handsome, charming, and a pathological liar from the moment he could speak. While I was staying up until 2 a.m. studying for AP exams so I could get a full-ride scholarship, because I knew there was no college fund, Kyle was being bailed out of trouble. I remember when I was 16. I had saved up $3,000 working 3 jobs, lifeguarding, tutoring, and waitressing at a Greasy Spoon. I kept the cash in a locked metal box under my floorboards. It was my escape fund. I wanted to buy a beat-up Honda so I could drive myself to libraries and job interviews without begging Mom for the keys. One afternoon, I came home to find the box sitting open on my bed. Empty. I ran into the living room, where my mother was sewing a new lining into one of Kyle's expensive private school blazers, even though he'd been suspended 3 times that semester. Where is it, Mom? Where's my money? I was shaking, tears already hot in my eyes. She didn't even look up. Kyle needed a tutor, Jennifer. A specialized one for his learning style. And he needed a new set of golf clubs for the junior varsity tryouts. It's important for his social standing. I worked for that. That was my car. My future. I screamed. She finally looked at me, her eyes narrowing. Your future is fine, Jen. You're smart. You'll always find a way. But Kyle needs a little extra help. We're a family. What's yours is his, and what's his is yours. Don't be so greedy. It's just money. That was the mantra. It's just money whenever it was mine. It's a crisis whenever it was theirs. The favoritism wasn't just financial, it was psychological. When I graduated valedictorian, my mother spent the entire graduation dinner talking about Kyle's unlimited potential in the music industry because he'd learned 3 chords on a guitar. When I got my first internship at a prestigious firm in Chicago, she called me crying, not to congratulate me, but to tell me that Kyle had crashed the car and I needed to wire her my first paycheck to cover the deductible so his permanent record wouldn't be tarnished. I spent my 20s building a wall. I moved to Chicago, changed my phone number twice, and limited my contact to monthly wellness checks. I thought I was safe. I thought that by being the successful one who never asked for a dime, I had earned my independence. I didn't realize that to my mother, my success wasn't something to be proud of, it was a resource to be mined. She must have started the identity theft years ago. She had all my documents from when I lived at home. My social security card, my birth certificate, my old tax returns. She knew I was a ghost on my own credit because I lived frugally and used a single credit card for everything, paying it off religiously. I was the perfect target. A high-income earner with no major debts and a predictable life. Sitting in my car outside the bistro, I realized the $85,000 loan Henderson mentioned was dated 3 years ago. That was the year Kyle invested in a crypto mining operation that went bust in 2 months. The secondary mortgage on the Indiana house? My mother's house. She had used my name as a co-signer without my knowledge to pull equity out of the only asset she had left, likely to pay off Kyle's bookies. The physical reaction finally hit me. I leaned over and vomited into a trash can on the sidewalk. My stomach was a knot of acid and betrayal. Every late night at the office, every weekend I spent drawing floor plans instead of going out with friends, every sacrifice I made to build a secure life, it had all been fed into the gaping maw of my brother's addiction and my mother's enabling. I pulled out my phone and looked at my bank app. My savings were still there. They couldn't touch those without my direct login, but my ability to move forward was paralyzed. I was a 32-year-old woman with the credit profile of a financial criminal. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over me. For years, I had played the role of the good daughter. I had absorbed the blows, paid the family tax, and kept my mouth shut to keep the peace. But the peace was dead. They hadn't just taken my money, they had tried to take my future. They had looked at the life I built and decided it was theirs to burn for warmth. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and put the car in gear. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to my office. I had copies of every pay stub, every lease agreement, and every tax filing for the last decade. I was going to build a timeline. I was going to track every cent of that $240,000. As I drove, my mother's voice rang in my head. You would ruin the family name over a few numbers on a screen? I gripped the steering wheel, a grim smile touching my lips. No, Mom, I whispered to the empty car. I'm not ruining it. I'm just finally telling the truth about what it's worth. The fluorescent lights of my office felt like cold needles against my eyes as I sat hunched over my dual monitors at 3 a.m. The building was silent, save for the hum of the HVAC and the rhythmic click-clack of my mouse. I wasn't designing a skyscraper tonight, I was dismantling a conspiracy. I had pulled my full 100-page comprehensive credit report, and seeing the granular detail was like watching a slow-motion video of my own murder. There it was, Jennifer Morris had applied for a $40,000 personal loan in August of 2024. I remember that month. I was in Tokyo for a week-long architecture seminar. I checked my old emails. On the exact day the loan was disbursed, my mother had texted me, "Hope you're having fun, honey." Kyle is finally turning a corner. He's so focused on his new digital asset firm. The digital asset was my debt. She had timed the applications for when she knew I'd be distracted, out of the country, or pulling all-nighters for a firm deadline. I found a secondary credit card, a platinum card with a $25,000 limit that had been maxed out in 3 months. The billing address? A P.O. box in Gary, Indiana, registered to Morris Consulting, a shell company my mother had set up using my name as the registered agent. I felt a cold, oily sweat break out on my forehead. My own mother had forged my signature on articles of incorporation. She had looked at my social security number, the one she'd memorized when she held me as a baby, and used it like a skeleton key to pick the locks of my life. I began a spreadsheet. I titled it The Entitlement Tax. Column A, Date. Column B, Amount Stolen. Column C, What Kyle bought. It was sickeningly easy to cross-reference. A $5,000 cash advance on a Jennifer Morris Visa matched perfectly with a photo Kyle posted on Instagram of a new gold watch with the caption, "Grind pays off." A $12,000 educational loan taken out in my name aligned with a trip they both took to a wellness retreat in Sedona while I was home working through the flu. By 5 a.m., the total was staring back at me in bright red, $244,580. My phone chimed. A voicemail from my mother. Her voice was no longer screaming. It was that terrifying, soft, reasonable tone she used when she was trying to gaslight me into submission. "Jennifer, sweetheart, I know you're upset. We all got a bit heated at the restaurant. But I've been thinking, and there's a way out of this. If you just take over the payments on the Indiana house, we can put your name on the deed officially. It's an investment. You're always talking about real estate. This way, the debt becomes good debt. We can just tell the bank it was a misunderstanding. Please, Jen." Kyle is literally shaking right now. He says if you go to the police, he'll do something drastic to himself. You don't want that on your conscience, do you? Call me. I listened to it twice. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. He'll do something drastic. The ultimate trump card. The emotional nuclear option they'd used since I was 10 years old to make me hand over my birthday money or my summer job earnings. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at the forged signatures. I realized then that they didn't just see me as a wallet. They saw me as a shield. I was the one who was supposed to take the fall, pay the price, and keep the family name pristine while they rolled around in the mud. The flashbacks started hitting me in waves, triggered by the documents. I remembered when I was 24, just starting my junior associate role. I had finally saved enough to buy a decent used car. My mother called me, sobbing, saying the property taxes on the family home were overdue and they were going to be evicted. I didn't even hesitate. I sent her $6,000, every penny I had. A week later, I drove down to surprise them. I found a brand new top-of-the-line home theater system in the living room and Kyle bragging about his new VIP membership at a local club. "Oh, Jen," my mother had said, draped in a new cashmere throw I didn't recognize. "The tax thing, a friend helped us out at the last minute. So I figured, since the money was already sent, we'd use it to improve the quality of life for the house. It adds value, you know? You're an architect, you should understand." I had stood in that living room, smelling the expensive scented candles she bought with my tax money, and I felt small. I felt like a servant who had performed her duty. When I tried to argue, she pulled the "after everything I sacrificed to raise you" alone card. She made me feel like the villain for wanting my own money back. That was the pattern. She would create a crisis, I would solve it, and then she would pivot the narrative so that I was the one being difficult for bringing up the cost. I scrolled further down the credit report. I saw a line item for a $15,000 business equipment lease. My mind flashed back to 6 months ago. Kyle had asked to borrow my laptop for a big presentation. He'd kept it for 3 days. When he returned it, he'd been overly affectionate, hugging me and telling me how much he looked up to me. Now I knew why. He'd used that laptop to access my saved passwords, to download copies of my digital signature, and to scan my ID, which I kept in a folder for work travel. He hadn't been admiring me, he'd been harvesting me. The betrayal felt physical, like a thick, heavy silt in my lungs. I went to the office kitchenette and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, pale, and vibrating with a quiet, lethal energy. I thought about all the times I'd skipped dinners with friends because I was saving for the house. All the vacations I didn't take. The cheap furniture I'd lived with for years, waiting for the real home to start my real life. They had taken all those missed moments, all that discipline, and they had gambled it away on bourbon, watches, and a house in Indiana that was probably rotting from the inside out. I sat back down and opened a new tab. I didn't search for how to forgive family. I searched for criminal defense attorney, identity theft, Illinois and Indiana jurisdiction. Then I did something I should have done a decade ago. I froze every single one of my accounts. I set up two-factor authentication that required a physical security key. I contacted the Morris Family Trust email provider and filed a fraudulent account report. As the sun began to peek over the Chicago skyline, painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber, I felt a shift. The good daughter was dead. She had been bled dry. My phone buzzed again. It was Kyle. "Hey Jen, Mom said you're being a bit of a psycho. Just calm down. I can get the money back. I have a sure thing on the game tonight. Just give me 48 hours before you do anything stupid. If you tank my credit now, I can't place the bet. Don't ruin this for me." I stared at the screen. He wanted me to stay quiet so he could use more of my destroyed credit to gamble his way out of a hole he'd dug with my bones. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it made me laugh, a sharp, jagged sound that echoed in the empty office. "Don't ruin this for me," I whispered. I didn't reply. Instead, I started a new document. Subject: formal affidavit of identity theft and forgery. I began to type. I didn't stop until I had 20 pages of evidence, timestamps, and a list of every lie they'd ever told me. I wasn't just going to the police. I was going to be the most prepared witness they had ever seen. I was going to burn the family name to the ground, and I was going to use the embers to light my way home. The last straw didn't come in the form of a grand confrontation. Came in a quiet, devastating realization 2 days later. I was sitting in my cramped, rented apartment, surrounded by the physical evidence of my stolen life, when a courier knocked on my door. He handed me a certified legal notice. It was a foreclosure summons for the Indiana property. My mother hadn't just defaulted, she had completely stopped paying 6 months ago. But it was the attachment that broke me. To secure the last emergency modification on that mortgage, she had submitted a forged medical hardship letter. Claimed that I, Jennifer Morris, was suffering from stage 4 terminal cancer and needed the funds to pay for experimental treatment. There it was, my name, my forged signature, and a fake letterhead from a Chicago oncology clinic. I stared at the word terminal next to my name. She had killed me on paper to save her house. She had invoked the most terrifying human experience, a slow, painful death, just to buy Kyle another few months of gambling and herself another few months of silk scarves. The betrayal was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing on my lungs. I didn't cry. I felt something far colder, a total, surgical detachment. My phone buzzed. A text from Kyle. "Hey, the game didn't go the way I thought. I need you to open a new line of credit at that jewelry store on Michigan Avenue. I have a buyer for a Rolex. Just one last time, Jen. If you don't, Mom is going to lose the house. Do you want her on the street? Is that what you want?" I looked at the text, then at the terminal cancer forgery. I felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it made my fingers tingle. This wasn't a family anymore. This was a criminal enterprise, and I was the involuntary silent partner. I finally understood that as long as I existed as Jennifer Morris, they would never stop. I had to become their prosecutor. The strategic twist began at 9 a.m. on Monday. I didn't go to the police first. I went to a high-end forensic accountant I'd hired with the last of my liquid cash, money I'd hidden in a physical safe years ago, ironically, to keep it away from my mother's emergencies. "Mr. Vance," I said, sliding the 20-page affidavit across his desk. "I don't just want a report. I want a map. I want to know exactly where every dollar of that $244,000 went. I want the IP addresses used for the online applications, and I want the delivery signatures for every luxury item Kyle bought." Vance looked over the documents, his eyebrows climbing toward his receding hairline. "This is thorough, Ms. Morris. But you realize that if we find evidence of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, this moves from a civil dispute to a federal level? You can't take it back once the ball starts rolling." "I don't want to take it back," I said, my voice as hard as a diamond. "I want them to feel the weight of every cent they stole." While Vance worked, I started my own reconnaissance. I knew my mother's Morris Family Trust password. She'd used the same one for everything since 2005, Kyle is King 1. I logged in, my heart racing. I found a treasure trove. Not just the loan documents, but a folder labeled Gen Info. Inside were photos of my tax returns, my passport, and even a recording of a phone call where my mother had mimicked my voice, practicing how to sound like me to bypass the bank's security questions. "Yes, this is Jennifer Morris," her voice recorded, sounding chillingly like mine. "I'd like to authorize a transfer." But the real leverage was in the sent folder. She had been emailing a local real estate developer in Indiana, trying to sell the equity in the house she didn't fully own. She was promising him a clean title once she dealt with her daughter. I downloaded everything. Every recording, every email, every photo. I backed it up to 3 different cloud drives and a physical thumb drive I kept around my neck. Then I made the call I'd been dreading but dreaming of. I called the detective at the Financial Crimes Division in Indianapolis. "Detective Miller? My name is Jennifer Morris. I'm calling to report a massive identity theft and mortgage fraud scheme. I have the forensic accounting, the IP logs, and the recordings of the suspects." "Suspects?" the detective asked. "Do you have names?" I looked at a framed photo on my desk, a picture of me, my mother, and Kyle at my college graduation. I looked at the terminal cancer forgery sitting next to it. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "The suspects are Elaine Morris and Kyle Morris. And I want to press every possible charge." The grand payback was no longer a dream of revenge. It was a scheduled event. I sent one final text to the family group chat. "I've made a decision about the debt. Let's meet at the Indiana house tomorrow at noon. We'll settle everything then." My mother's reply was instant. "Oh, thank God, Jennifer. I knew you'd do the right thing for your family. We'll have a nice lunch ready. Love you." I stared at the "love you" until the words lost all meaning. They thought they had one. They thought the good daughter had finally folded. They had no idea that I wasn't bringing a checkbook to that house. I was bringing the end of their world. The drive from Chicago to Indiana was the longest 3 hours of my life. The flat, gray landscape blurred past as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. On the passenger seat sat a heavy leather briefcase. It didn't contain architectural blueprints. It contained the forensic autopsy of my family's morality. I pulled into the driveway of the house, my mother's house, the one she'd bled me dry to keep. It looked charming from the outside, with its manicured lawn and blooming hydrangeas, but to me it looked like a tomb built of forged signatures and lies. I walked inside, and the smell of roasting chicken hit me, a domestic, comforting scent that felt like a slap in the face. My mother was there, wearing a floral apron, her face glowing with a triumphant, predatory warmth. Kyle was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "Jennifer." "Sweetheart," my mother chirped, moving to hug me. I stepped back, the movement sharp and clinical. Her arms hung in the air for a second before she dropped them, her smile faltering. Oh, well, I understand. You're still a bit prickly. But we're so glad you've come to your senses. Kyle, put that phone away. Your sister is here to save our home. Yeah, Kyle muttered, standing up and stretching. He looked at the briefcase. Is the paperwork in there? The consolidation thing? I really need this cleared up by Monday, Jen. There's a guy I owe for well, it doesn't matter. Just glad you're finally playing team ball. I walked to the dining room table, the same oak table where I used to do my homework while they watched TV, and clicked the latches of the briefcase. Snap. Snap. The sound was like 2 gunshots in the quiet room. I'm not here to consolidate anything, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion, a flat, architectural line. I pulled out a stack of documents, the terminal cancer forgery, and slid it across the table toward my mother. I want to know who wrote this, Mom. Which one of you decided I was dying to get a mortgage break? The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost. She glanced at the paper and then at Kyle, who suddenly found a great interest in his shoes. Jennifer, that was a desperate measure. We were going to lose everything. It was just a formality, a white lie to a big, heartless bank. A white lie. I slammed my hand onto the table, the vibration rattling the silverware. You killed me. You wrote a letter saying your daughter was dying of stage 4 cancer. Do you have any idea what that does to a person's soul to see their own mother wish death upon them for a lower interest rate? You're overreacting, Kyle shouted, his face reddening. It worked, didn't it? We got the extension. You're fine, you're standing right there. Stop being so obsessed with yourself for 5 minutes and think about the family. The family. I reached into the briefcase again. I pulled out a digital recorder and pressed play. Yes, this is Jennifer Morris. I'd like to authorize a transfer. My mother's recorded voice filled the room, chillingly accurate. My mother staggered back, hitting the sideboard. Where did you get that? That's private. That's evidence, I interrupted. And here is the rest. I began laying out the entitlement tax spreadsheets, the IP logs from the Gary P.O. box, and the photos of Kyle's grind pays off Instagram posts alongside the credit card statements. I didn't just find the debt. I found the trail. I found the Morris Consulting Shell Company. I found the wire transfers to your bookies, Kyle. And I found the email where you, Mom, tried to sell this house behind my back. You wouldn't, my mother whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. You're our Jennifer. You're the good one. You wouldn't destroy us. I didn't destroy you, I said, leaning in. I could see the fine lines of age and deceit around her eyes. I could smell the expensive perfume I'd unwittingly paid for. You destroyed yourselves. You just used my name as the fuel for the fire. Well, the fire's out. That moment, there was a heavy knock on the front door. Not a neighborly knock. A rhythmic, authoritative pounding. Kyle bolted toward the back door, but I didn't even flinch. Don't bother, Kyle, I said, checking my watch. I gave the Detective Miller the floor plans of this house an hour ago. They're at the back gate, too. The front door opened, and 3 officers in windbreakers stepped in. My mother began to scream, a high, piercing sound of pure, indignant rage. How could you? You traitor. You're no daughter of mine. After everything I gave you. I watched as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. I watched as Kyle was tackled in the kitchen, crying and begging for one more chance. I felt nothing. No joy, no sorrow. Just the strange, hollow relief of a building finally being demolished so the site could be cleared. As they led my mother past me, she spat at my feet. I hope that house in Chicago makes you happy, Jennifer. I hope you enjoy being alone. 'Cause that's what you are now. You have no one. I looked her straight in the eye as the officer nudged her toward the cruiser. I've been alone for 20 years, Mom. I'm just finally moving into a better neighborhood. It's been 6 months since that day. The legal process has been a grueling marathon of depositions and court appearances. My mother and Kyle accepted a plea deal, 3 years for her, 5 for him, given his prior sealed records I never knew about. The family name is effectively dead in Indiana, dragged through every local paper as a cautionary tale of greed and fraud. My credit is still a mess, but with the police reports and the criminal convictions, the fraud department at the banks is finally working with me. $244,000 is being slowly carved away, categorized as the theft it always was. I won't get my Lincoln Park brownstone this year. Maybe not next year either. But I live in a new apartment now. Small and the floorboards do creak, but every single item in it belongs to me. Every fork, every chair, every lamp was bought with money I earned and kept. Last night I had dinner with my chosen family, my 2 best friends from college and my mentor from the firm. We didn't talk about family wallets or blood being thicker than water. We talked about my new project, a community center I'm designing for underprivileged kids. We laughed until our sides ached, and when the bill came, we split it 4 ways, exactly down to the cent. I realized then that my mother was wrong. I'm not alone. I'm finally free of the parasites who tried to convince me that my worth was measured by how much they could take from me. I'm Jennifer Morris. I'm an architect. I build things that are meant to last on foundations that are deep and honest. My family tried to build a life on sand and stolen dreams, and they watched it collapse. Me? I'm just getting started on the blueprints for a life that is finally, beautifully, entirely my own.